I refuse to look up. Optimism nauseates me. This is a quote from Ignatius J. Reilly, one of the main characters in A Confederacy of Dunces, the 1963 Pulitzer Prize-winning novel written by John Kennedy Toole that takes place in 1960s New Orleans. The book was written by Toole as he sort of descended in the end of his life towards grief and paranoia, and it was finished 2 months before he killed himself. The book is beautifully written. It's a tragedy, but it's very well disguised as a comedy. So the characters live lives that are filled with day-to-day disaster and misfortune, which I'll touch on later. But they're written out as if they're sort of comical mishaps, but they just sort of pile up and pile up and pile up until you realize that the book is really a tragedy. That helps to illustrate the main theme of the book. So the book begins by following Ignatius, who's the son of a poor family. They spent all their money sending Ignatius to college and to graduate school with the thoughts that he would go out and get a job to support the family, but as it turns out, he just stays home all day, watching TV or going to the movie theater. He doesn't have a job. He lives with his mother, who's a single mother, and she bends head over heel for him to take care of him, buys him whatever he wants, whenever he wants, and he doesn't appreciate her, and he disrespects her and is rude to her. Ignatius thinks that he's sort of far superior morally to everyone around him, especially his mother, who's the one taking care of him. So the book begins by following Ignatius, but it splits into 6 subplots, and there is no main plot. All the plots are equally important. Ignatius sort of manages to pop up in every plot, most of the time as the antagonist, but the other plots are still connected because all the characters in the plots are either friends or they have contempt for each other or they're employee. So, like I stated, the book is a tragedy. Although the narration is purposefully written with whimsical undertones, the thoughts and the words of the characters themselves aren't sugar-coated. So it's not a traditional book because this book has sort of no main conflict that the protagonist has to overcome. It just sort of follows the lives of several New Orleans families that are all interconnected, and all of the mishaps that happens in their lives. They just sort of suffer and suffer and suffer every day. But to them, that's how life is. There's no protagonist in the book. Each subplot sort of has semi-antagonists. Some subplots don't have an antagonist, but who might be the antagonist in one subplot will be the protagonist in the next subplot. So there's really no antagonist-protagonist in this book. There are 6 plots. One of them is Ignatius and his misadventures as he caused his mom to get into a car crash that she can't pay for because the family's so destitute. So he's forced by his mother to work menial jobs. Follows his mother, who's so invested in her son, who is rude to her and disrespects her and is costing her all of this money. And she eventually devolves into alcoholism because of how horrible her life is. It follows the police officer who had arrested Ignatius a few times, and he's degraded by his supervising officers, and he's made to humiliate himself daily. There's Burma Jones, who's a young black man, and he's forced to work a job below minimum wage, so he won't be reported to the police, who wouldn't arrest him for any crime he committed just because of his color. It follows the owner of a failing clothing factory and his wife, who hate each other. It follows the owner of a failing nightclub who sells drugs to an orphan to distribute in order to supplement her funds. It's a hilarious book to read, but as you read it, you sort of realize that in reality it's a very sad tragedy. You would think it's a comedy when you begin to read it. It deals with poverty, discrimination, alcoholism, drugs, and broken households. And it's a book where nobody wins. It's more about the reader watching as the characters are somehow able to persevere through their daily lives that are sort of deteriorating with this sort of apathetic perseverance. So it's fiction that relates a little bit more to actual life, but it's narrated in a way that makes it, one of the funniest and most enjoyable books that I've ever read. Even though, as you read it, you realize it sort of has very serious hidden themes.